Hello YouTube, it's a lovely evening in Georgia and you are looking at two very different groundbreaking cars. You probably hate this one and love this one, or hate this one and love this one. Lots of opinions. I thought it would be good to do a video. I have a neighbor who is a friend and we've been talking about cars for years, and he has a beautiful 1988 Fiero GT with a bunch of really cool mods, and I recently got this and added it to my collection. And I thought it would be fun to do a video and just talk about two very different groundbreaking cars in very different ways. And we're just gonna do a short discussion about what makes these cars great, what makes them unique. And I think it would really be fun if you're a fan of either car or don't know anything about either, for you to leave some commentary and discussion about what you think makes each of these cars groundbreaking. So we'll start with the history. We'll start with the Generation 1 Honda Insight. This is a 01 Honda Insight. They made these for 7 years, from 01 to 06. It was a complete failure on Honda's part. They lost money. They tried to make a car that was the most fuel efficient car possible, and they achieved that end, but they didn't sell a whole lot. They did make a second generation, I think starting in 2010, which was more like the Prius, and then now there's a third generation coming out in 2019-20. But they tried to build a car that was uncompromising, and it was a market failure. It lost a lot of money, and I read in several places they did not make any money making these cars. They lost money. However, for the few and proud like myself, they've driven these and realized that it's a neat car, and there is a growing interest in these Generation 1 Honda Insights, and the reasons why I'll talk about in a moment. Fiero GT history.
Okay, this is a 1988 Pontiac Fiero GT. They made them for 5 years, from 1984 to 1988. It was originally designed as a commuter car. It came out in '84, right after the gas crises of the 1970s, and GM and Pontiac thought, hey, let's have something that looks cool, handles really well, and gets 35 miles to the gallon.
And let's do a walk around as we talk.
All right. The initial vehicle had a 92 horsepower, 2.5 liter 4-cylinder engine.
The dreaded Iron Duke.
The dreaded Iron Duke. It eventually got up to 98 horsepower by 1988. And people said, wow, this is a great car. It's lots of fun. Unfortunately, it doesn't have enough power. So in 1985, they added a V6 engine. This is a 2.8 liter V6. And
it moves.
It moves pretty well. It has
140
horsepower, which doesn't sound like a lot nowadays. Sounds like something that a Corolla would have. But keep in mind that Pontiac's 5-liter V8 at the time only had 150 horsepower.
That's right.
So not a bad engine.
Awesome. Excellent. Yeah, and this is a beautiful car. I love this car. I'm not a Pontiac fan. He's tried to kind of sell it to me, maybe. And I keep buying Hondas, so but maybe one day that will work out. We'll take a quick look. But this only has like 80,000 miles, right?
Almost 82.
Okay, so yeah, cool. So that's a short history on both cars. Let's talk about the data real quick. Engine, you have a 2.8 V6. I have a 1.0 3-cylinder with IMA, which is integrated motor assistance. And power torque, you said 140-ish, 135 horsepower?
It actually gets 140 horsepower. My car has a couple of those cool mods that you mentioned.
Right.
I have 1.6 rockers. I have matched the air intake, smoothed it out.
So what are we at now in theory?
I'll say I'm at least 150.
Okay.
Yeah, so I could probably beat that Corolla.
So yeah, so 150, let's just say 135, 140 from the stock was this, and that's at 4,500 RPM, and then 165 torque. Is that correct?
Yes.
And that's at 3,600 RPM. The Insight has a whole 80 horsepower with both motors going, the 3-cylinder and the IMA, and it has at 5,700 RPM, and it has 91 foot-pounds of torque at 2,000. 0 to 60 on the Fiero is 7.9 seconds, and a quarter mile at 16.5. 0 to 60 on the Insight Generation 1 is 10.5 seconds, quarter mile in 17.8. So the Insight actually starts to catch up with the Fiero as it gets toward 100 miles an hour, which was interesting to me. But rear-wheel drive 5-speed, front wheel drive 5-speed, seating capacity 2, seating capacity 2. You weigh 2,791 pounds.
That's right.
And I weigh, say again?
At least the car does.
Okay, yeah. And I weigh 1,878 pounds. You are getting 18 EPA, 18 miles per gallon city, 27 highway. That's correct. You're getting a little more than that with your mods.
I'm actually getting around 23 around town, and on the highway I have hit 32.
Okay, that's excellent. And I am 61 city, 70 highway, and my highway best is 72, and I've only done one highway trip. So you're 11 gallons, 11.8, I'm 10.6. Your drag coefficient is a very low 0.37. Mine is a very low 0.25. And I think I'll just blast through some of this other stuff. Let's talk about price. As new, you were $13,999 in 1988, which adjusted for inflation is $30,340. Brand new, I was $20,080 in 2001, and adjusted for inflation, that's $29,087. Your car today,
about the same.
Yeah, about the same, which is really interesting. So today, a car like this, you said, is worth $7,000 to $8,000.
Roughly. This is pretty much an unmodified, very good condition Fiero.
It is. I've driven it.
If it was
He tells the truth.
a concourse quality Fiero, it would probably be 17 to 18,000.
Right.
What's funny is if it was not still an original Fiero, if it had been modified well with a Lamborghini body kit or a Ferrari body kit or a Porsche body kit, you'd be talking upwards of $30,000.
Wow. And yeah, so yeah, 7,000 to 8,000 for a good example is what I did a little research and looked as well. This car, the Insight, these in this condition can be had for between 4,000 and 6,000. There's a couple that went for 7,000 with just a few fewer miles than mine on Bring a Trailer. And then there's a couple that actually went up towards 20,000, but that was with like 5,000 miles. So I guess you'd call that the cream puff perfect.
Yeah, that's the same with Fieros.
Right.
And if you had a V8 Fiero, you might be getting a whole lot more with aftermarket
V8, yeah.
parts, 3800 superchargers, things like that.
Right. And then let's talk production numbers, and then we're going to get to the good stuff. They made, I read, or you may have told me this, 370,000 Fieros between 84 and 88, and 6,848 GTs.
Yep.
Like yours, not like yours red, but GT. In 1988. So 370,000 of these. Were only 17,000 of these made. So I did the math, and there are 4.6 Insights on the road for every 100 Fieros, or at least that were sold, which is interesting to me.
That is interesting.
That's crazy.
Now, also what you were saying before about Honda lost money,
Right.
at least on the V6s, GM made money
Did they?
with all of these.
Cool. Sweet. Well, let's go into the next thing we want to talk about with some groundbreaking things. So I asked my neighbor, think of a few things for your car that make it groundbreaking, and I'll start with the Insight. Just a few things I'm going to rattle off so we don't go super long. This was the first hybrid in the United States. The Prius started in Japan in 1997, but it did not make it into America until I think about half a year after the first gen Insight. So this is the first hybrid in the United States in the year 2000. It set a number of records, the best highway mile per gallon, 70, which I think something tied it recently or maybe beat it, but it held that record for a long time. And the same with the lowest drag coefficient, the 0.25, which is interesting to note. When you're driving this car and you're cruising at 40 or 50 or 60, it almost seems to just float along. You can really feel that lack of drag in the car. The driving experience is what makes this a very unique, groundbreaking car. Even though it has under 100 horsepower and torque, it actually feels very peppy. Any review you read, the people say, wow, this really actually feels kind of quick. And it does from 0 to 30. After that, it dies off, but it has enough power to get you going. And it's a very good handling car. It has very low weight. The steering wheel is tiny. The shifter is like a toy. It's just a very small, different to drive car. It was built, another interesting thing that makes it groundbreaking, it was built in the same factory as the Honda S2000 and the Acura NSX. which means that it was hand built in small quantities by people that were building high-level sports cars. So for that reason, the build quality of these is probably a little better than something built by the novice mechanics. And then the other thing that just is my favorite thing about this car, and then we'll switch back to the Fiero, is that this really is an uncompromising car, and that's why I bought this car. After driving it, it's not a quick car, it's not a great car, but when you drive this car, you realize that it truly is, the people that designed and built this, they were completely uncompromising, and it shows in the way this car drives in the road manners. Their goal was to make something that spared no expense and cut no corners to make the most fuel efficient car possible, and they achieved that. So it's really neat to drive a niche car like that that has those qualities. Let's talk about groundbreaking things about the Fiero. Let me rattle off. You got maybe a couple minutes to spend on this, so tell me some thoughts.
Okay. The Fiero was a compromise car. It was pretty much made with off-the-shelf GM parts. With the 84, the rear suspension was actually the front suspension of a Chevette.
I read that.
And they just locked the steering arms into place.
Okay.
By the time they got to 1988, they actually had their own Fiero suspension. And this was much, much better. Far better than what they originally had to do. The
we walk this way as we
steel,
talk.
this was actually the second safest car that was introduced in 1984.
Right, next to the Volvo 740 wagon.
It had a 600-pound steel space frame around the cockpit.
Okay, wow.
The car itself, like I said, was not designed or not meant to initially be a sports car. At least that's what the designer said.
I mean, it doesn't look like one at all.
Yeah, not at all. It was supposed to be that fuel-efficient car, but then everybody said, hey, let's give it some more power. You'll happen to notice that that engine bay right here has more than enough room for, say, an LS engine, or, well, anything else. And if you felt like using the trunk too, put whatever you want in there.
Sure. Groundbreaking, what else?
What other groundbreaking things? Of course, I can't think of them right now. The designer was actually a Turkish immigrant named Hulki, which I always thought was a great name. The car has the incredibly cool, if you ask me,
Woo! You got your money. You got that's the price tag right there. 12:30 is when the lights went up.
That is perfect. And it has undoubtedly the coolest cup holder.
Oh yeah.
Of any car I've ever seen.
Dang.
How else can you do that?
Look at that. It holds two, and it'll hold a big gulp too.
Oh yeah.
Dang it.
Not one problem there.
Sweet.
This is just a cool car.
It is. Yeah. I would say, from not knowing nearly as much as you do, probably to me the most innovative thing about this is just they built a mid-engine. This is the first mid-engine production car since until 2020, I think it was, when
that
the Corvette became the second.
Well, yeah, the Fiero Part 2.
Right.
Yeah,
of course.
Yeah. You can see the front there. You put a gym bag out there. You have enough room for a weekend trip. I know, I've done it.
Nice. All right, well, let's close out here and talk about some kind of final flaws and final words, and we'll make this part quick because we're getting a little long. But flaws of the first gen Insight. Well, number one, it's butt ugly. It's just an interesting and to many people unattractive car. And I've only owned this 3 weeks, but pretty much everyone I even mentioned that I have one, including a Fiero owner, basically said, "Why in the world did you do that?"
Yeah.
So.
And yes, I agree. The butt is ugly. In typical Honda fashion, they forgot to finish designing the car.
Right. Not my Prelude. You like my Prelude.
Your Prelude is one of the few, but I look at a Del Sol.
Right.
And some other Preludes. It's like they forgot to do the back.
Right.
It's beautiful until you get to the back.
Well, I'm glad you like the first. Here, we'll just do this. Another flaw of this car, it has a very rough suspension. Now, I did upgrade the springs, but we won't talk about that now. That helped some, but that's a common complaint of this car, is the rough suspension, which was done for the sake of efficiency. And then the other flaw just is that when the IMA battery dies, they're pricey. They start around $1,100 and they can go all the way up over $3,000 if you want to replace. Now, the car will drive in gas-only mode, and it still gets fantastic gas mileage, but it doesn't perform nearly as well.
That's why I was leaving you behind?
No, I'm I'm keeping my MPGs like in the 60s, so I drive slow.
Oh,
Yeah,
all right.
plus you're a lot faster. So the IMA battery is, there's a lot of these for sale for $2,000 or $3,000, and you read the fine print or talk to the owner, and they're like, "Oh yeah, it's in great shape. The battery just needs a charge," which that's bull. What that means is you're about to fork out $2,000 or $3,000 if you don't buy one of these that has a warranty with a battery. Prepare for heartache. Flaws as we close about the Fiero. Are there any? I'll tell you one thing.
Okay, go ahead.
Man, all the way behind you, I had my window down because I just enjoy the summer air. And that carbon monoxide. Whoo!
Oh, I put on that for you.
Okay, did you?
There was an extra
appreciate
switch,
that.
and I had to go.
Oh, okay. You had the
so-
kill switch. Kill the Honda owner. Flaws, seriously though.
Yeah, a little bit more storage space would be nice in there. Like if they had some sort of flip up thing, and you'll notice that there's this
Right.
to hold stuff, and I have this little thing to hold
But not
stuff,
a lot more inside.
but there's no glove box.
Yeah,
So-
you're interestingly. I don't think we mentioned this, but the cargo volume on you is 7 cubic feet in the back.
Yeah.
Whereas mine in the back is 16. So that's a significant difference.
This
But there's not a lot of room
this
for.
could hold 2 golf bags. That was
Okay.
the GM requirement at
Right.
the time. You must hold 2 golf bags. Another problem with it, these cars are addictive.
Oh,
You get one. I know someone who has 2 or 3 or 4 or 5.
okay.
They're like models.
Yeah.
If I don't want to have the spoiler on, it's 4 screws.
Right.
I can take them off.
Right. Yeah. And I remember you had it off at one point.
Most of the parts you can get that are not Fiero specific because they're from the GM parts.
Right.
bin.
Right.
Mostly it's just a fun car.
Okay, so
take it out.
being a negative would just be the addictiveness, which really any hobby car, but this is a unique car.
Yeah, and
It-
people
it really is.
come by and they say, "Wow, what is that?"
Yeah.
There's one guy who didn't believe it was a Pontiac. I did a cruise and there was this blonde woman who jumped in the car to take a look at it. Fortunately, my wife was sitting next to her at the time, so she was surprised. Both were.
Any advice to someone who's looking at this? Why don't we go to the front again? Any advice to someone looking at maybe getting a Fiero that, just what they need to know as they shop for a Fiero restoration build project, whatever?
I'm going to suggest you get a manual transmission.
Of course.
Get the best one you can. Join a Fiero club. The Fiero community is incredible. You can ask them questions and they'll send you pictures of how to fix it.
Right.
They will seriously go out of their way to help
Yeah,
you out.
definitely.
But once again, be aware that you will be looking up to Camrys.
Right.
This looks really fast, but your 0 to 60 is about equivalent to that Sport Camry right now.
Right.
So
Good.
it's mostly looks, but
Good,
man,
yeah.
they are fun to drive.
I think that's really an honest assessment. Not a lot of old cars are quick anymore, especially affordable old ones. But this is a car for me I would buy for the rareness, the uniqueness, and the look. It's just to me one of the most beautiful cars on the road. And that's how I met my neighbor here. I saw it out there. I was like, oh, okay, we're friends now.
It was in
And
my
that was
garage
many
as
years
you
ago.
came in.
Yeah, I saw the butt of it, and I was like, well, let me close with some final thoughts on the. If you're looking for an insight. If if you're like me, you never gave these things the time of day. And I have a car similar to the Fiero. I have a 5th gen Prelude. I also have a Fiesta. That's my fast car. So the attraction of this to me was just how different it was. And I never gave this car the time of day until I drove one, which happened by accident. And as a car nut, I realized I have never driven anything like this. There is no car like this. I've got to have one. And so
Why is it different?
Yeah, so why is it different? Well, I thought I kind of talked about that. From what? Why is it different
you're
from?
saying it's different from any other car you've ever driven. In
Yes.
what way is it different from any other car you've
The
ever
feel, the steering. This thing's turning circle, which I think I mentioned earlier, is
Yeah.
tiny.
Yeah.
I mean, it just will do. The turning circle's 31 feet. 31 feet is nothing. The wheel is an S2000 wheel. The gear shift is like a toy. The throws are just a few inches between. So when you drive this car and it weighs so little, it just feels like nothing else. Shifting the gears, steering, the input, just the lightness of it, you can feel it. I mean, my Fiesta's 2,700 pounds, but this is almost 1,000 less than that. And you just feel that. And for me, when I drove one, and then that plus the MPG, I just said, wow. There's a great online support group, but here's the advice I'd say. Know what you're getting into. Because again, these are quirky and you know, they're old cars, and there aren't a lot of people that even know how to work on them. So know what you're getting into. Hey, let me end with this. Rust? I don't think so. Rust? I don't think so. Why? Because these cars are plastic, and that is the one thing that unifies them, other than being groundbreaking, different, unique cars. We hope you've enjoyed our mashup of the Fiero and Generation 1 Insight, two very different cars, two amazing cars. Thanks for watching. Look forward to reading your comments.